Hey, Shalom Israel. Yahweh Bashem, Yahweh Shah Barakatham, Yahweh Shemal Thumb, Bashem, Yahweh Shah. The ISUPK started at 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commander General Yohana. We teach the truth concerning the Bible that so-called Black, Hispanic, and North American Indians are descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel, the chosen people of God. This is ISUPK Kentucky Precinct Officer Howard Moore. This is our Wednesday night law class. Now, before we get into it, I want to shout out and invite every so-called Black, Hispanic, and North American Indian to tune in to ISUPK Kentucky weekly content. Monday night history class taught by Officer of 1,000, ISUPK. Tuesday brotherhood class taught by Officer of 1,000, I'm a Bar. Wednesday law class, we finna get into it. And every Wednesday night, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., Cry Out, Spare Not podcast, the baddest podcast around, hosted by officers of 1,000, I'm a Bar, and ISUPK. Come get the biblical breakdown and the biblical solution to all the viral videos running across the internet. Every Saturday, you have a Sabbath service taught by Officer of 1,000, a Son of Quash, and every other Sunday, which you ain't learning history class. Now, tonight, what we finna get into is the failure of Black nationalism and all Skinfolk and Kinfolk. The failure of Black nationalism and all Skinfolk and Kinfolk. Now, what you mean by that? Well, everybody dark skin ain't necessarily the same, and we've been fooled into believing that everybody that's dark skinned is your people. All right, we finna get into a couple articles tonight. We finna get into a couple slides that's gonna go into a little bit about why Black nationalism was a failure. Of course, we're gonna get into it with the Bible, and we finna go ahead and get it on. So, the first article tonight: affirmative action helps Black immigrants, but not Black Americans. Again, we're gonna get into the failure of Black nationalism and all Skinfolk into Kinfolk. All right, it says, at my college, many departments offer modest awards for the best Black student. College rejected one department selected winner. However, because the student was American. All right. Now, the article is affirmative action helps Black immigrants, but not Black Americans. We've been fooled from the people that pushed this so-called civil rights movement that all of these benefits were going to come to the people that fought in the struggle for civil rights. All right, it says, this administrative decision points to a conundrum for colleges. How to respond to Black immigrants' performance compared to Black students who trace their ancestry to America. The immigrant students' performance has resulted in their disproportionate representation in most selective schools. The outcome was first highlighted in 2004 when Black Harvard Law professor Laney Guinier and Henry Louis Gates Jr., chairman of Harvard's African American Studies Department, said that somewhere between 1/2 and 2/3 of Harvard students were African immigrants or their students. All right. 2/3 of the so-called Black population at Harvard were African immigrants or the students of African immigrants. All right. This goes directly to the topic, the failure of so-called Black nationalism or African American nationalism and all Skinfolk into Kinfolk. All right. 2/3 of the so-called Black population at Harvard are African immigrants or the students of African immigrants. Well, you wanted to be an African so goddamn bad, this is the result. You wanted to be an African so goddamn bad, this is the result. All right, but when I was coming up, kids was calling each other African booty scratcher. I think we had the right idea in them time. But for all those that wanted to be African so bad, this is the result. 2/3 of the so-called black population at Harvard are African immigrants or the children of African immigrants. It said a few years later, Jeffrey Core reported, and second-generation immigrants comprise 41% of all black students at Ivy League schools. The large number of African immigrants on American college campuses, coupled with the remarkably small number of native blacks on those campuses, calls into question the effectiveness of America's affirmative action programs. Look, it said the large number of African immigrants on American campuses, coupled with the remarkably small number of native blacks, calls into question the effectiveness of America's affirmative action program. Isn't this what people fought for in the civil rights era? Isn't what all those students, all those college students was paid to march for? Wasn't this a part of the plan for integration? I bet you never thought it was going to have no place for you. But you wanted to be African so goddamn bad, this is the result. All right. African immigrants are the majority in these Ivy League schools. Let's walk it down. The response of selected colleges was twofold. First, affirmative action was no longer justified as compensation for slavery and institutional racism, but solely for its potential impact on diversity. So look, they don't even give a damn. They don't even give a damn about correcting the wrongs of the past. They don't give a shit about trying to correct the criminal acts that their forefathers committed on our forefathers. Their number one goal is diversity. Their number one goal, as long as it's a dark face in the room, they don't give a damn where it comes from. And they would prefer to give it to an African over a so-called Black, Hispanic, or North American Indian. This is the result of the civil rights movement. Everything that we were supposed to be marching for is given to a completely different group of people. Like I said, the article just said that the majority of so-called Black students on Ivy League campuses are African immigrants or the children of African immigrants. All right. Second, and somewhat paradoxically, the most selective schools stopped reporting on the ethnicity of their Black student population. Indeed, Todd Hamilton's 2019 book, Immigration and the Remaking of Black America, does not make a single reference to the Black immigrant student share at Ivy League colleges, including his own at Princeton. It says immigration and the remaking of Black America. All right. These people are trying to remake Black America with an immigration, with the immigrant population, to prove that this was never about so-called Black, Hispanic, or North American Indians. All right. And nothing that we marched for during the civil rights movement, none of the benefits of this is going to the children and grandchildren of the civil rights movement. It's going to African immigrants. All right. And a means to replace what they call the native population. Well, if you know anything about American history, that was the plan the entire time. When we read about the Republican Party and how the Republican Party freed the slaves, well, they never intended on the free slaves to stay. It was always a means to deport the slave population out of America. All right, do the history on the American Colonization Society. Do the history on the colonization of Sierra Leone and Liberia, and you'll see that these places were populated by America's former slaves. All right, these people never intended on us being here in the first place. All right, the entire abolition movement was about deporting America's former slaves. And again, today we're being replaced on Ivy League college campuses by African immigrants. All right, it says the lack of data became an issue at Cornell University. All right, this is a Quaker university. We might be having a class coming soon about the Quakers and the origin of HBCUs and the origin of Black Greek letter organizations, but that might be coming a little bit later. But it's the lack of that became an issue at Cornell University when Black students demanded that affirmative action be reserved for students who could trace their American ancestry back at least 3 generations. They noted that Cornell does not ask those who identify as Black how many generations their families have lived in the United States. Under this system, the children of immigrants from Africa who identify as Black can count. All right. And Cornell University, the crazy part about it, is Cornell University had the very first Black Greek letter organization. Alpha Phi Alpha came out of Cornell University. Alpha Phi Alpha, the very first Black American Greek letter organization, came out of Cornell University. And today, they don't even check to see if the so-called Black students that are getting benefits from affirmative action are first generation African or not. All right, this is about the failure of Black nationalism and all skinfolk ain't your kinfolk. We finna walk it down tonight. It says in 2021, a descendant of slavery, Mariah Norman discussed how immigrants or the children of immigrants dominate the Black student environment at Harvard. She pointed to the Nigerian Student Association that claims 200 members, suggesting that 1/3 of Harvard's Black student body is in the club. More than 15 Black affinity groups exist on campus, like the African Students Association. And while the Black Student Association encompasses all, there wasn't an organization solely for Black students like Norman until students got together in 2021 and formed one. Norman believed that nothing could change until Harvard started reporting on the ethnic composition of its Black student population. Again, all of this was about, the whole game been from the beginning was about replacing the native Black population. Again, all the way back to the 1860s, when the Republican Party and the abolition movement was pushing deportation to the colonies in Liberia and Sierra Leone. They wanted to get the native Black population out of here on the first thing smoking, all right, to replace the population. And they're doing it again today on these Black college campuses where affirmative action is benefiting African immigrants the most. All right, let's drop this. Next article. All right, let's talk about another beneficiary of affirmative action. white women benefit the most from affirmative action. So alongside the Africans that are taking a big slice of the pie, white women, the oppressor's daughter, is taking the largest slice of the pie when it comes to affirmative action. All right, it says, people often associate affirmative action with efforts to end discrimination for people of color. But scholars say the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action policies are white women from college campuses to the American workplace. The number one beneficiary of affirmative action on college campuses and the workplace is white women. African immigrants and white women are taking the largest chunk of affirmative action. It says white women today are more educated and make up a bigger slice of the workforce as a result of decades of affirmative action policies, scholars say. White women have also made inroads into corporate leadership that people of color and women of color have not. So not only are Africans pushing out the native black population, but white women are pushing out the native population when it comes to Ivy League colleges and the workplace. It says the Supreme Court on Thursday struck down affirmative action admission policies used by Harvard College and the University of North Carolina to build diversity on their campus. Now, we just read about this diversity. It's all about what they call diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not about righting the wrongs of the past. It's about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It says legal observers say that decision will have huge consequences for higher education and can have significant ripple effects for corporate diversity programs. Affirmative action refers to efforts to curb discrimination in employment, education, and government contracting. Affirmative action was first used in 1935 in the Wagner Act, a federal law that gave workers the right to start and join unions. JFK was the first president to use the term to mean advancing racial equality. But again, we just read that it was never about righting the wrongs of past discrimination. It was never about righting the wrongs of past discrimination. It was about replacing the native black population, right? It was about replacing the native black population with actual African immigrants. Again, do the history on the American Colonization Society. We might get into it tonight a little bit. Do the history on the colonization of Liberia and Sierra Leone and the plans for America's former slaves. America's former slaves were never intended on being citizens here and were never intended on enjoying the full benefits of first-class citizenships. So everything that our parents and grandparents marched for, right? Inclusion and affirmative action, well, it's all being given to African immigrants and white women. Again, the topic of tonight's class is the failure of black nationalism and all skinfolk and your kinfolk. Let's go ahead and drop that to get into some slides. All right, so where does all this African nonsense come from? Where does all this African nonsense come from? Where does all this black Americans believing to be Africans, right? Believing to be African Americans. Where does all this black nationalism come from? And why has it failed And why are African immigrants and white women being the biggest beneficiaries of it? Let's walk it down. All right, so Prince Hall. All right, this is the cat that started what's known as Prince Hall Freemasonry. Supposed to be Black Freemasonry, but he started an organization called the African Lodge in 1784. All right, Prince Hall was a freeborn in the British West Indies. His father was an Englishman, and his mother a free colored woman of French extraction. He later became a minister in the AME Church with a charge at Cambridge. Here's your source here. So Prince Hall had an English father and a French mother. And this is the man that starts so-called African-American Freemasonry in 1784. All right, a man with an English father and a French mother starts so-called the African Lodge and African-American Freemasonry. Let's walk it down. All right, here goes Thornton Jackson. Thornton Jackson was the man that gave Prince Hall all of the rites and rituals of Freemasonry. Now, Thornton Jackson, all right, Sovereign Grand Commander of Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite, all right, organized the United Supreme Council Southern Jurisdiction over 50 years ago. All right, this is the man right here that taught Prince Hall all of the rites and rituals of Freemasonry. Well, Thornton Jackson used to run with a white boy named Albert Pike. All right, Thornton Jackson was closely associated with Albert Pike, one of the best authorities on Scottish Rite Freemasonry. But Albert Pike was a Klan member. All right, Albert Pike was a Klan member. All right, Albert Pike was a Klan member. Now, this Klan member rode with Thornton Jackson, and Thornton Jackson is the one responsible for teaching Prince Hall all the rites and rituals of Freemasonry. All right, so Prince Hall Freemasonry, the so-called African Lodge, right, has a white daddy who was a Klan member. All right, has a white daddy that was a Klan member. And this is where this whole push to Africanize, the Black American population. All right, Free African Society, 1787, established under the leadership of Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. This organization fostered identity. All right, we're talking about where this whole African idea comes from. We're talking about where this whole idea of Black nationalism comes from, why it failed, and why all skinfolk ain't your kinfolk. Again, we just read in an article that showed that African immigrants are benefiting more from affirmative action on college campuses and the workforce than Native Black Americans. All right, again, the Free African Society fostered identity, leadership, and unity among Blacks, and became the forerunner for the first African American church in this city. And the city is Philadelphia. All right, the city is in Philadelphia, one of them old 13 colonies, but the Free African Society was established to foster identity. It was designed to give an identity to the Black population in America. So out of your Free African Society comes the AME Church. All right, African Methodist Episcopal, started in Philadelphia, and they moved it down south. All right, the Ebenezer Baptist Church split from the Ebenezer A&E in 1886, and Adam Daniel Williams was the first pastor. He was the grandfather of Martin Luther King Jr. And this is how this so-called Pan-African consciousness or this Black nationalism moved down south And that's how Martin Luther King got it. He got it from his grandfather. All right, back to Africa movement. Started by a white boy. All right, founded the American Colonization Society to send Black Americans to Liberia. This was the whole play from the jump. We always hear in history class that Black people used to vote Republican because it was the Republican Party that was the party of Lincoln. It was the Republican Party was the party that freed the slaves and started the abolitionist movement. But the second part of that was deportation. All right, again, do the history on how many American former slaves was deported out of the country. How many of America's former slaves were deported to Sierra Leone and Liberia to set up colonies there? So Black Americans were being deported in the 1800s, and today we have actual Africans benefited the most from affirmative action programs. All right, let's walk this down. This is the failure. This is the failure of Black nationalism and all Skinfolk ain't your kinfolk. All right, the Ebenezer AME Church split in the 1860s and moved down to Georgia. Okay, again, this is how this Philadelphia Black church, this is how this Black church that pushed the African consciousness on the people, this is how it moved down south. And Martin Luther King's grandfather was the first pastor. All right, prominent Black activist Marcus Garvey once said, "I regard the Klan as and the Anglo-Saxon club and white American societies, as far as the Negro is concerned, a better friend of the race than all other groups of hypocritical whites put together." Marcus Garvey said the Klan was a better friend to the race. Well, it shouldn't surprise you because the African Lodge, so-called Black Freemasonry, was started by a Klansman. So if so-called Black Freemasonry, the so-called African Lodge, if it was started by a Klansman, should any of us be surprised that Marcus Garvey, the big Pan-African, the big Africa for the Africans, the big Black nationalist, regarded the Klan as a friend to the race? Let's walk it down. All right, Melville Herskovitz, president of the African Studies Association, 1958. All right, a Jew, a so-called Jew, was the president of the African Studies Association in 1958. All right, African Studies Association in 1968. A Black caucus was formed within the ASA led by John Henry Clark. We've all heard of John Henry Clark. All right, anybody in the Pan-African community, anybody in the Black nationalist community knows that John Henry Clark is one of their champions. Well, John Henry Clark was a member of the African Studies Association in 1968, while this so-called Jew was the president. The next president of the African Studies Association was another Jew named L. Gray Cohen, who was a CIA affiliate. So this whole idea of Black nationalism and an African-centered consciousness so far comes from a Klan member and a CIA affiliate. Let's walk it down. All right, Alex Haley, a Freemason and plagiarist. All right, Alex Haley, accused of plagiarism in 2 separate lawsuits. All right, this man's book Roots was plagiarized by 2 different white authors. All right, he was accused of plagiarism and lost in court. He lost in court to the equivalent of today's $2.9 million. Basically, $3 million this man lost to because his movie Roots, or his book Roots is fake, and it was plagiarized from 2 white authors who wrote fictional novels about actual Africans in America. All right, this is the history This is the history of so-called black nationalism. All right. So we have the origin of so-called African-centered consciousness, right? Comes from a Klansman and his influence in the African Lodge and Black Freemasonry. We have the Free African Society and its influence on the first Black church in Philadelphia. We read about how it came down south and how it moved down to Georgia, and Martin Luther King's grandfather became the first pastor. We also read in the article earlier about how actual Africans are benefiting the most from affirmative action. And today, we have these so-called African studies being defunded. All right. After all this, African studies programs are being defunded all across the country. Well, you wanted to be African so bad, you begged the white man to be African so goddamn bad, now he's taking your funding from you. You begged the white man so bad to be African, now he's taking your funding away. And it's happening in schools. It's happening in schools all across the country. All right. Ron DeSantis, Black officials in Florida are seeking to overturn the administration's determination that the class significantly lacks educational value. Again, you wanted to be African so goddamn bad. You begged the white man to be African so goddamn bad. Now he's taking the goddamn funding away. All right. This is the failure of black nationalism and all skinfolk ain't your kinfolk. Again, we read in the article earlier that African immigrants are benefited more from affirmative action on college campuses and the workforce than native Black Americans. All right. This is an old article, Kansas City, Missouri. All right. Disenfranchise the Negro and send him to Africa. Let's scroll down. It says, besides, the Negro is not African. All right, this is an old article, Kansas City, Missouri. It says right here in black and white, the Negro is not African. But because of Klan involvement in Black Freemasonry, because of an African-centered consciousness in the Black church, we beg the white man to be African so goddamn bad. But right here in the old article, Kansas City, Missouri, it says the Negro is not African. All right, this is from the Zondervan Bible Dictionary. Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born 96 years before the flood, became one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, but not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. All right, Ham is the progenitor of the Egyptians, African, Ethiopian, African, Libyan and Canaanite, African, but not the Negro. But again, since the Klan involvement in so-called Black Freemasonry and some African consciousness in the Black church, this is why we beg to be African so bad. But the whole time, the whole play, since the end of 1865, in the end of the era of chattel slavery, these people, our enemy, was determined to deport many native blacks as they possibly could through their programs in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And today, across college campuses, they're cutting the funding for African studies, and actual Africans are bigger beneficiaries of affirmative action than native Black Americans. So Black folk ain't African. If Black folk ain't African, according to these 2 last sources we read, all right, ISUPK under Commander General Yohana has been teaching since 1969 the so-called Black, Hispanic, and North American Indian are the 12 lost tribes of the nation of Israel. All right. This is who blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians actually are. All right. Blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians have nothing to do with any kind of African booty scratcher. Blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians are descendants of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. Let's get into the Bible. Let's get into the Bible. All right, let's go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 8. When the Most High divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So what is it saying? It's saying the Lord, the Most High God, Yahweh in the Hebrew, divided the nations and gave them their own inheritance. All right, the Arabs got their portion. The Africans got their portion. The Chinese got their portion. All right. All of the nations were divided, and the Lord separated the sons of Adam. All right, let's drop that. Let's go to the book of Genesis, chapter 9, verse 18. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. Now, we just read that Ham is the father of all the African nations. All right, the African nations that benefit more off affirmative action, yeah, these Africans, these Hamites. All right, and Ham is the father of Canaan. All right, let's drop that. Let's go to the book of Judges, chapter 3, verse 1. The book of Judges, chapter 3, verse 1. Now, these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the wars of Canaan. So again, over here, we just read that Ham was the father of Canaan. So these Canaanites were Africans. But the Bible said, now these are the nations which the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel had not known the wars of Canaan. All right, verse 2. Only that the generations of Israel, Judges 3, verse 2. Only that the generations of the children of Israel might know, to teach them war, at the least, such as before knew nothing thereof. So these Africans were left around us to teach us war. These Africans, these Canaanites, who were the descendants of Ham being the African nations. All right, these Africans were left around us so that we can learn war. Not so we could integrate, not so we could try to be African, not so we could learn black nationalism and Pan-Africanism from the Klan and the Black church. Not so that we could be okay with them benefiting from the struggle that we went through in the 60s. We just goddamn read that Africans are benefiting more from affirmative action on college campuses and the workforce. All right, let's drop that. Let's go to the book of Leviticus, chapter 11, verse 45. Leviticus 11, verse 45. For I am the Lord that bringeth you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Ye shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. All right, so the word holy is the Hebrew word kodash, that means to be separate. All right, we're meant to be distinct from these African nations of people. All right, not integrated and mixed up with them. We just read in the article that affirmative action now is replacing the native black population with African immigrants. All right, let's drop that. Let's go to the book of Exodus, chapter 11, verse 7. Exodus 11, verse 7. But against any of the children of Israel shall not a dog move his tongue against man or beast, that ye may know how the Lord doth put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel. The Bible says there's a difference, there's a distinction between Africans and so-called Blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians. There's a difference between the two. And the Lord put that difference. The Lord put that difference between Blacks and Africans. Right? The Lord put that distinction between Blacks, Hispanics, and North American Indians and Africans. All right. But the so-called Black Freemasonic movement, the Black church, all right, tried to muddy the waters and make Black Americans African. All right, let's drop that. Let's go to the book of Psalms, chapter 78, verse 51. And we'll see what the Lord thinks about Africans. Psalm 78 and 51, and smote all the firstborn in Egypt, the chief of their strength in the tabernacles of Ham. Verse 50. He made a way to his anger. He spared not their soul from death, but gave their life over to pestilence. All right, and that's exactly what the Lord did. All right, if you know anything about Africa at all, Africa is the land of flies. It's not the motherland of anything. It's the goddamn mother of flies, because the Lord gave them over to pestilence. All right, the Lord gave them over to pestilence. All right, let's drop that. Let's go to the book of Zephaniah, chapter 2, verse 12. Zephaniah, chapter 2, verse 12. Echelon, Lord of Christ, sir. Ye Ethiopians also, ye shall be slain by the sword. All right, this is what the Lord thinks of Africans. This is what the Lord thinks of Africans. Zephaniah 2 and 12, ye Ethiopians also, ye shall be slain by the sword. All right, this is what the Lord thinks of Africans. So go ahead and be an African American all you want to. Go ahead and be a Black nationalist all you want to. Be a Pan-African all you want to. The only result of it is the African studies programs in school. The funding is being cut, and African immigrants are the ones that are benefiting from affirmative action programs in Ivy League schools. All right, let's drop that. Let's get into some African culture since you want to be African. All right, so let's go ahead and end this, man. Let's go ahead and end this. Let them enjoy the land of the flowers. Let them enjoy getting pissed on by cows. Look, anybody out there watching, if I may, tune in 9 o'clock tonight, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. every Wednesday. All right, Crowd Spin Out Podcast, the baddest podcast around. Come get the biblical solution from the priest of the Lord to all of your viral videos going across the internet. Come get the answers to all of your everything going down your timeline. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and end it. Shalom, Yahweh, Bashem, Yahweh, Shah, Barak, Thumb, Yahweh, Shamar, Thumb, Bashem, Yahweh, Shah. Class dismissed.